very cool.
That's really cool.
Yep.
All right, so I think we should go ahead and get started. Are you okay with that, panelists? Good? Okay. So to everybody that's joining us right now, thank you guys so much for being here. We know there are so many Zoom meetings and webinars and all that stuff out there. So from all of us, we're very grateful that you decided to be at ours today. I want to go over a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the intros. And our panelists are going to share a little bit about why we started this webinar series and what our intentions are with it. But before we get to that good stuff, I want to bring everyone's attention to the Q&A feature of the webinar. So if you look on your Zoom, you should see a little Q&A button. I want to invite all of you guys to load your questions into that feature as we go through the webinar. So while Shannon is presenting, if you have questions, load them in there, and then when we do Q&A, we will get to your question, okay? Also, we are recording this. As I'm sure you've seen on our Facebook page, we always post the webinars a few days after. So if you got a jet a little early, that's okay. We're not going to take it personally. I'll make sure you get the video in an email or up on YouTube and Facebook, stuff like that. Also, if you'd like, you can post your contact info in the chat. You'll see that I put all my stuff at the top there if you need it. And I don't feel like I have to say it, but I want to make sure that the chat is a friendly place. We have a lot of different experiences happening right now, so let's leave judgment, shame, any of that kind of stuff out of the chat. We're here to be supportive. So that's the housekeeping. That being said, if you don't know me, my name is Jeremy Miller, and I represent Conscious Recovery, which TJ will talk about, I'm sure, as well as Bright Future Recovery, which is a detox in Hollister and an outpatient program in Los Gatos called Embodied Recovery. We are all open for business, so if you need support, let me know. That being said, Shannon, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Shannon Clay, and I work with Discovery Behavioral Health. I've been in the field for 34 years and, or 32 years, 34 years in recovery, confused, too old. And I want to be an ongoing part of bringing resources to people. And I just want to say that our goal in this webinar is to bring resources that we all feel that we have access to for thriving. We all feel like we have the opportunity to thrive in life, even when we're having shelter in place, and we're privileged to have so many different resources in our life. So the purpose of our webinar is to bring those resources to you guys, and hopefully you share them with other people and share the webinar information. And it's just basically resources for thriving. Also, I can be reached for any kind of resources, and so can any of our panelists, and Shannon McQuaid, also the speaker today. So please reach out to us if you need anything, any therapy, any programming, any meeting information, mental health, addiction treatment, anything like that. That's who we are, and that's what we do. And we would love to help you with whatever you need. So thanks for being here today.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. Vicky, how about you? You want to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Shannon. I can't wait for this. Super excited. My name is Vicki Lucas. I'm an interventionist. I'm in the Bay Area, but I'm really all over the United States, actually. I just agree with everything Shannon just said. We really want to reach out to the community and be here to support everybody in these times, and offer any kind of resource that we can. I'm not obviously tied to a program. I'm an interventionist, but everybody in this panel would be happy to refer you to any kind of resource that you need. It doesn't necessarily need to be anything that we're attached to. That's not what this is about. This is about offering something to the community, which we don't normally get to have. It's not normally accessible. So we just want to be here for you and hope you enjoy these webinars with a little bit of therapy, and you get to ask some questions and get some answers, and we're loving it. Thanks.
Awesome, Vicky. Thank you so much. So TJ, along with your intro, I was hoping you could offer a brief meditation for us, if that's possible.
That is not only possible, I think it's probable.
Awesome.
I just want to share, when Vicky started, I thought you said, I disagree with everything Shannon just said. So that was an awesome moment. I'm like, oh, she said, I just agree. So I'm TJ Woodward. I'm the creator of Conscious Recovery, CEO of Conscious Recovery. If you're not familiar with Conscious Recovery, go to consciousrecovery.com. We're a treatment modality focusing on the essential wholeness in a person rather than the brokenness. A little bit of a plug for our Conscious Recovery podcast. Jeremy Miller's the host. I think we have 7 episodes up and more coming soon. It's a really great time to be hanging out and listening to podcasts. So I wanted to say that. On a personal note, or maybe it's personal and professional, you know, I'm really aware that one of the things that maybe hasn't been talked about a lot yet in the mainstream media is the mental health component of what's happening in our world. I'm hearing a little bit of conversation about it, but I noticed that they're focusing mostly on the physical aspect of what's happening in our world. And there's a very, very huge emotional, spiritual, and mental aspect as well. And the reason I'm saying that is the intention, as Shannon Clay said, the intention of this webinar is to provide resources, but also really support one another, because I think we're about to swell, let's say that, in our opportunity to serve people. There's going to be a really high need to support our clients. And I think we're going to see an explosion in our field in the coming weeks. So I'm prepared for that. And this webinar is intended to help us share resources so we can be the most effective in our work. So having said that, also gratitude for Shannon McQuaid. I'm really, really grateful that you're here with us, and looking forward to your presentation. And of course, everyone else, grateful for you too. So let's do our meditation. I invite you, as you feel ready, to gently close your eyes. And we begin by taking a nice deep conscious breath together. And on the exhale, simply allowing ourselves to become fully present. Giving ourselves permission to bring our full attention and intention to this very moment. Simply checking in. Where are you at in this moment? Where are you at physically? How does it feel to be in your body? Is it possible to give yourself permission to relax? Noticing thoughts, becoming curious. Playing with the idea that we have thoughts, but we're not our thoughts. What a relief right now to know that I have thoughts, but it's not who I am. Dropping down into our heart space, becoming aware of the emotional inner landscape. Taking just a few moments here to simply feel whatever is present. Is it possible to lean into the emotion without a story, just experiencing what is? And then finally, we shift our awareness even more deeply inward, discovering that place of inner stillness, always one breath away. So we simply allow ourselves now to drop into that inner stillness as we co-create the intention to be open and receptive, knowing that every word Shannon speaks is spoken from her essential self, and we receive it from that place of openness, curiosity, awareness. So with that, we simply take 30 seconds in the silence. And then slowly beginning to bring our awareness back into this time and space. And as it feels right for you, I invite you to gently open your eyes.
Sorry, guys, I was muted there. Rookie mistake. Thanks, TJ, for the meditation. Clearly, I was a little too into it. But I'd like to go ahead and introduce Shannon McQuaid now. Super excited for Shannon's presentation today. I'll give you just a brief bio and then let her take the mic from there. So Shannon has been in the field of addiction and mental health for over 25 years. The majority of this time, she has assumed roles in leadership as a clinical and executive director. She has maintained a private practice throughout, and most recently, before joining the Soul Surgery team as executive director, she was the clinical and executive director for Promises Scottsdale for the past 10 years. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a licensed independent substance abuse counselor. She is also a certified sex addiction therapist and certified Daring Way facilitator. So Shannon, thank you so much for being here, and we'll let you go ahead and start your presentation.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I just wanted to really share my gratitude to start with for all of you for inviting me here to connect. It's really exciting. I think Shannon, Vicki, TJ, and Jeremy, and the amazing work that you guys are doing and giving me a platform to share some of my passions with all of you. So I wanted to start by talking about this COVID-19 uncharted waters that we're sailing in right now, and facing new terms like quarantine and social distancing. And we're seeing people separating themselves with masks and with gloves, and also losing purpose and identity. We're alienated from family members and friends. A lot of us are unemployed right now and don't have that purpose. A lot of us are missing volunteer opportunities. And we're in this state of intense fear, uncertainty, and scarcity. The idea like we go to the grocery store and we can't find things that we need. It's a really helpless scarcity type of issue. And we tend to get in, due to that, some moments of shame, which at its basic definition is not being good enough or enough. And we also get into self-protection. We begin to guard ourselves and move away from who we are. So I want to talk a lot about some different tools that we can use in regards to this. And one of the things that I think a lot about when I think of COVID-19 is how we are starting to move away a little bit from who we authentically are, because we're missing these roles, we're missing who we are, and we're in isolation a lot. And so I often hear the question in my private practice of, I feel lost, I don't know who I am anymore. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about authentic self and how we get back to that person that we are, and maybe even spending some time during this period when we have a little bit more time for ourselves than usual to kind of reset about that. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was values, realignment with values. I think we throw that word around a lot and we talk about values. We may say, oh, family and work and things like that, and they're just casual words that we said. But when we really, really take the time to look deep down and think about maybe the top 3 things that make up us internally, it's really important to think about that, because what we want to do is make our internal selves congruent with our external selves. So in other words, whatever my internal values are, I want to be acting on those in my behavior. So if someone saw me in my day-to-day life, I wouldn't have to tell them what my values were. They would see that. When we have that incongruency between our values and our behavior, that gap, that's where shame creeps in. That's where we feel shameful. So for instance, if my values, let's say 2 of my top values were integrity and love, and let's say I'm going around not being honest with people, telling lies, and maybe I'm experiencing a lot of anger and unkindness and hatred, I'm not going to feel good about myself knowing that that is like completely opposite of where I'm at. And so a practice, just a very simple thing to do, is really taking the time to take a look at huge lists of values. You can find them on the internet, you can find them anywhere, and think about your top 3 and maybe do a little reevaluation every night. Like, you know what, today I did great here and I sucked at this, and tomorrow I'm going to get to do better. And it just really helps us close that gap between shame and gets us congruent internally and externally. The other thing, when I think about authenticity, I think getting back to those things that we think about when we were a kid. I don't know, like I can remember moments as a kid when I lost track of time and I was in a zone doing an activity. And for me, that was hula hooping and roller skating. And I actually still do that as an adult sometimes for fun. But maybe that's horseback riding for you. Maybe that it's coloring. I don't know what it is. But going back to bringing some of that into our world as an adult, and maybe that's going to look different. Maybe soccer was my thing and I'm in my 60s and I can't play soccer, but maybe I can do something else that brings out that person that I really am inside. So just kind of thinking back to those things when we're younger, when we were in the zone, time stood still, we didn't know where we were, and bringing those back to life for us today. And that's also a part of finding our authentic self. I also want to move into thinking about things that drive us away from that we need to continue working on. And so I want to talk about our internal critic. We all are our number one internal critics. In fact, the latest research tells us that we say 1,200 negative messages to ourselves a day, and many of them we're not even conscious of. And that's not a good thing, because if we're not conscious, if we're not aware, we can't change what we're not aware of. And so beginning to pay attention to what is in that internal critic voice and beginning to move into self-compassion. So for instance, and I'll talk about the definition of self-compassion, but for instance, like when we make mistakes, many of us, when we screw up with a presentation at work, or we get a bunch of critics after us about something, we usually have a tape inside that's playing for us. And that tape might be saying something like, oh, you're so stupid, you're an idiot, why'd you do that? What happened? And there's a couple tools when that internal critic gets really loud that we can use. And one is a cognitive behavioral tool, and it's called the 3 C's. It's called catch it, challenge it, and change it. So if I'm doing something and I have an old tape message that makes me think that I'm not good enough and I'm stupid, if I catch the thought and become aware of it, I can challenge it and say, do I have any hard evidence that I'm stupid? And the answer is no. And then I can change that thought and think, you know what, I just made a mistake. I'm imperfectly perfect. I'm human. I can move on. Because we all have these negative tapes from being younger that we carry with us throughout our lives. So being aware of those and starting to use that technique, catch it, challenge it, and change it. And then the other thing is self-compassion. And there's a couple definitions that I like to use when talking about self-compassion. The first is, do I talk to myself the way that I talk to somebody that I love? The answer for most of us is hell no, we don't. So when we screw up, we have a whole negative tape about being an idiot, whatever our negative tape is. But when somebody we love screws up, when my daughter screws up and does the same thing, I tell her, it's a mistake, you're human. Like, you're gonna learn from this and move on. So constantly reminding ourselves of that idea. Can we talk to ourselves the way that we talk to somebody that we love? And we have to be conscious of it, because we're hardwired to be critics. We walk in a room, most of us, and we think, well, we see dust, we see a picture that's crooked, we don't like this piece of furniture. So we have to train ourselves to begin noticing the positives. And that is a part of it. That's a part of it. Can I talk to myself the way I talk to somebody that I love? The second piece of that is common humanity. Do I know that anything that I've experienced, that's been done to me, that I've said to myself, that other people are with me? I haven't experienced anything that somebody else in the world hasn't experienced themselves. And so, that in these times too, we feel alone. And that's, to be able to know that we're a part of common humanity, we're not alone in this, is huge. It kind of takes away a lot of that shame-based stuff that we tend to live with and feel alone. Also, as we're talking about these really trying times and being more self-protected and guarded in armored, we tend to lose our ability to be vulnerable. So as we talk about this idea of being physically vulnerable, and TJ brought up a great point, we're also mentally and emotionally very vulnerable right now. And so it's a good reminder to know that when we're not vulnerable, we cannot connect with other people. There's a great saying out there that you will never experience grief if you never experience love. And I think this to be true. I hear so many times from clients saying, I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to experience negative feelings. And we can't select out of negative feelings. We either feel or we select out of all feelings. So I often talk to my clients like, you can do that. You can select out of feelings and just live like this on a flat line, just kind of numbed out. Or you can experience life, which looks like a giant roller coaster up and down. And we have the ability to experience great love and passion and joy. But we're also going to experience pain and heartache and disappointment. But what we have to understand as humans, which many are scared of, is when we're in those depths, we're not going to stay there. We're not going to cry for a month. We might cry for a night, but we're resilient human beings. So we have the ability to pick ourselves up, to move through that. And so it's really important and a part of connecting. We can't connect with other people if we're guarded and armored up. And, that leads me to kind of talking about, when we're talking about connection, this idea of empathy. And I often, when I talk about empathy, like to compare that to sympathy. So many of us think that empathy is a natural, innate characteristic. It's really not. It's a learned technique to be empathetic with other people and to be vulnerable with them. So when we're empathetic and we're connecting with another person, what we want to do is, number one, we are critics and judges. So we have to remind ourselves to stay out of judgment. Do not judge what I'm hearing when I'm connecting with somebody. And then number two, we want to take on their perspective to understand what they're saying, asking questions, connecting with them, and then being able to touch a feeling in ourselves of what they're feeling. So many people, when they think about empathy and connecting, they'll say, well, I can't connect with them because I've never, or have empathy for them because I've never lost my husband, or I can't have empathy for them and connect because I'm not in recovery, or I can't have empathy because I've never been divorced. What we do, we don't connect to the experience, because the fact of the matter is, two people in recovery, their stories are completely different. Two people who are divorced, their stories are completely different. What I often ask my groups when talking about this is saying, raise your hand if you've experienced grief. Raise your hand if you've experienced joy. Raise your hand if you've experienced disappointment. So we all have the ability to connect and be empathetic as we're connecting to the feeling and sharing our experience of connecting to that feeling. Really, really important. The difference between that and sympathy is the idea that you're over there and I'm over here, and what's happening in your life doesn't happen over here. So you might hear somebody having a conversation where maybe somebody's trying to be vulnerable and talking about an issue in their home and maybe some struggles with their husband that they're going through. And particularly in these times of being isolated, we're hypersensitive to those things. And if you hear somebody who's being sympathetic, they might say, oh, you poor thing. Oh, so sorry for that. Most of us, when we hear that, shut down. We don't speak anymore because we're connecting to a wall, versus somebody who says, oh, wow, tell me more about that. I'm struggling too. My struggles are a little different, but let me hear what's going on. And finding out, tell me more about that. What are you feeling? Oh, I have felt that way before too. This is how we connect. This is how we use empathy. And I know it's tough right now to connect, but we have to be creative with it, like we're doing today. I mean, this is an amazing opportunity of connection, and doing things that we can do with social distancing or Zoom or anything else till we can get ourselves back out there. The next thing I wanted to talk about is gratitude. And again, that's another word we get thrown around everywhere. Be grateful, show some gratitude, stay in gratitude. But I want to talk about why we're talking about that. So if we look at psychology in general, the major studies of psychology are abnormal psychology. So if we're looking at this, graph of what we call normalcy, whatever the heck that is, abnormal psychology is looking at what makes people below that level, what tends to make people more depressed, more anxious, unhappy. Well, there's a whole branch of psychology that's relatively new in the last decade called positive psychology. And positive psychology, they've done several longitudinal studies that have come out in the last 5 years that are quite amazing. And one of them looked at a group of people over 30 days, and they did this study 3 different times. And they measured their neurotransmitters before the study and then after. And they actually saw different neural pathways in their brains from doing 3 very, very basic things. And I always tell people when I share this with them is, we as a society are a quick fix society. We want to take a pill for depression. We want to eat food to make ourselves feel better and drink alcohol and do drugs and have sex and whatever the heck that is. But if we knew there was something we could do 5 minutes a day, why the hell would we not do it? It's a practice I do every day, and I would encourage and challenge all of you to try it as well. And so there's 3 things they found that you can do that did this over 30 days. And one was writing down 3 things that you're grateful for every day that are different. So we may start that with, I'm grateful for my family, and I'm grateful for my friends, and I'm grateful for food, but we're going to end on a different thing, that I'm grateful for that flower I'm staring at, and I'm grateful for a cloud in the sky. Reminding ourselves how much there is to be grateful for. So that's writing down 3 things that you're grateful for. The second is journaling a positive experience, 3 to 5 sentences. That's it, every day. And there's a lot of days that's really easy, but there's a lot of days that's not. That we think, God, this day just stunk, and I haven't been feeling good in these times of what we're going through. But we can always find something. Maybe it was somebody smiled at you at the store, or maybe it was going for a walk and realizing something about yourself, or maybe your partner made you dinner. I don't know, but finding something positive that you can write about. And the last one is doing 1 random act of kindness for someone every day. And that, again, can be very simple. It could be, right now and what we're living through, dropping a note on somebody's door or texting a nice message to somebody, something very simple. And so 3 basic things we can do to really change our day-to-day from what we know from hard research. So I think that's pretty awesome to think about. The last thing I really want to talk about is being gentle with ourselves and with others, giving people a wide band of expansion of forgiveness, because we all are dealing with, as we were talking about before this call, like we have great days and we have really bad days. And I try to remind myself when there's that person in the store that's, yelling at people or being really rude or cutting in line or whatever that may be, that maybe that person is living alone and hasn't had any connection and is really angry. Maybe that person lost somebody this week that was important to them. I don't really know what's going on, but really trying to give people a wide berth as well as ourselves. And I like to use one of Brene Brown's techniques that she uses, which is permission slips. And so I often will write my self-permission slips during the day, like permission to just be goofy today and goof around with my kids and not really get a lot done, or permission to read and rest, or permission, whatever that it may be for me, to allow myself to do that. Because a lot of those things we have a hard time with. We feel like we want to be productive and we need to be positive all the time. And it's really just not realistic. We're perfectly imperfect. We're human. We make mistakes. We screw up. And so really being in full self-acceptance of us and of others is really important during this time. So as I'm talking, and as I always do when I'm talking, I love to share my most favorite quote in the world. And I share it all the time. I should have it memorized, but I don't. And so I'm going to share it with you, and I'm going to talk to you about why I think it's so important, because it's been really impactful in my life, and I hope that I can share it with you and maybe you get something out of it too. but it's a quote by Theodore Roosevelt. And so I'll talk a little bit about why this is so important to me. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them different. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcomings, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best, in the end, knows the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. Folks, we are in the arena. This is the arena of life right now, like what we're dealing with. And, you know, I think as we're getting out there and as we're talking about authenticity and I'm talking about vulnerability, is it's scary out there on a lot of different levels, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all of these things. And there's a lot of people, we have our internal critic, and there's a lot of people who are too afraid to get out there and be themselves, who are better sitting on the sidelines criticizing what everybody else is doing. And so it's a time to really think that we need to show up for each other in the support section. We need to be compassionate with each other, compassionate with self. We need to be empathetic with each other and support each other in these really difficult times, because it's not easy. And so I hope that all of you can do that for one another, and just remember that piece is that we're all trying here. And it doesn't help ourselves or anybody else to sit in that critic seat. We want to be supports for one another. So thank you so much for letting me share some of my passions with you. And I will turn it back to you, Jeremy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon. That was amazing. And I feel like you were talking directly to me that whole time because of the mute incident earlier in the webinar. Because right after that, I was in my narrative thick. And then you talked about that right away. And I was like, oh my God, how does she see me right now? That being said, so you guys joining us, please feel free to load your questions into the Q&A feature, and I will give them to the panelists to answer. We've got our first one. The first question is about writing the sentences, the 3 to 5 sentences. The question is that about that day?
Yeah, so it would be something you did as a reflection on the day, and just writing 3 to 5 sentences about a positive experience that you had that day. Very simple.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Let's see. Alexa says, thank you, Shannon. That was what I needed to hear today. Me too. Francis said, thank you, Shannon. That was so wonderful and needed. All right, let's see. Any other questions, guys? Go ahead and we'll give it a minute if you want to take some time to put your questions into the chat.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Shannon. You make me cry every time you talk like that. I was just like, oh my God, so emotional. And I appreciate you bringing that. So, and my big love for your message today is that you bring tangible tools for us, right? Like, those 3 things that we can do are so important to do. And it's hard. Sometimes I think we get so caught up in busy, go, 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 go. And especially for us in the field right now, it's shockingly busy. It's insanely busy. So it's super easy to get swept up in that. So I'm very appreciative of your tools and of your spirit. I really love you a lot.
I'm giving you a hug.
and by the way, Pamela missed the beginning of it. She's in here now though, Pamela Cuppers. And she said, oh my God, Shannon, I miss her. Do you have a recording? I missed the beginning. So I told her, yes, we're recording.
Oh, great.
Just so you know, you're well loved by so many people.
Thank you, Shannon.
And I thank you so much, Shannon. I am so grateful for this connection. And, you know, we've had a little bit of a virtual connection, but now hearing you, I just feel your heart. And to both Shannons, thank you for your vulnerability. there are two things I wanted to kind of reflect upon that you shared about. One, just what Shannon Clay just demonstrated, right? And that is, as we have the willingness to be vulnerable and authentic, that creates a space for someone else to do the same. And isn't that powerful? And as Shannon, as the tears were coming up, you know, I had a very, very rough day yesterday. I woke up feeling very sad. And it did not go away. And in an old paradigm, I used to think the goal was to get rid of that. What do I
Right.
do to not feel this? But what I've learned is lean into the sadness, honor the sadness. And I went, my husband and I have two places. We're primarily together, but I have my place where I come do all my work. And I went back home and I said, honey, I'm going to need a little extra attention today. I'm feeling really sad. Now, I would have never been able to ask for that before, right?
That's
I would have been like,
wonderful.
everything's fine. I'm good. I'm the spiritual guy. I have to always be spiritual, right? And what I've come to reflect upon and really know is that being authentic is the deepest spiritual state. Right? It's like, I'm authentic in my sadness. I'm authentic in my joy. I'm authentic in my confusion. And I don't think any of us can be there every moment. But what I've discovered is I have the ability, because of what I just witnessed with Shannon Clay, it's like, oh yeah, that's why we're really here.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to just say something about the journaling practice. I was reflecting on my first year of recovery, and I did high point, low point, 3 things I'm grateful for. And
Nice.
it was life changing, but I want to share, and then I'll stop talking. But I want to share that when I first started the practice, because I reflected on it after a year and read them, it started with externals. The high point was someone said something nice to me, or I felt really good about this, or, you know, but then as that process went on, it became an internal. And you talked about value. So it was,
Yeah.
what was the high point was the way I managed something, or the way I could lean into something, or the way I could be there for someone. And so what was happening externally over the course of a year, I started realizing the high point isn't about what's happening. It was internal. So I don't know if you have anything more to add to that, or if there was a question there, but I just want to say thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, I think that's kind of the process of thinking about different things, because we do start off like that, you know, and people often talk about journaling. Why should I journal? Why should I write it down? Journaling is such a huge processing of just writing things down, is processing the information. Even if, you know, we write down our trauma stories, that is a processing of the information. It's a first start. And so that's really what that's about, is that when we're able to write it down, we can see it. It gets out of our mind, gets out of our head. And that it works the same way with positive or negative things. If it's positive, we can reflect and look at it. If it's negative, the same thing, but it's at least out of our body and our minds.
All right. Absolutely. Thank you for that, TJ and Shannon. So we've got a couple questions now in the chat, Shannon. So the first one actually is a really, really great question. And she says that in the title of the webinar, we talked about not ruminating. And if you find yourself in that mental moment, how do you switch gears?
That's a great question. You know, I think that people do get stuck in that piece of rumination. And sometimes when we're doing that, we bring up old garbage, old resentments, things like that. And that often can be a sense of control for us, that we are a victim, and we can become self-righteous, and we can become more defensive and protect ourselves. And so there's a couple things that we can do in order to move ourselves away from that. One of them is what I talked about, the 3 C's, is catching it, challenging it, and changing the thought when we're ruminating about it. Another thing is to journal about it and challenge the story that we've told ourselves. That's a big one, because when we build resentments, or we have a resentment, we often make up a story in our head about what happened, why the person did it. And a lot of times it's not correct. We kind of put our own spin on it, our own life stories on it. So really challenging what's the real story about. How do I get clear on that? How do I let go of the power? Because that rumination and that resentment zaps us of energy. We feel fatigued. We get negative. And so beginning to do those processes are like the 3 C's: journaling, challenging your story, radical self-acceptance, knowing that I'm human, I'm okay. These are thoughts that people have. I can move out of them. I can choose to think about other things, because our thoughts come first and then our feelings and our behavior. So we can choose what we're going to think about sometimes. If we're strong enough and we practice that, we can choose, and that changes how we feel and what we do.
Excellent. So great question. Thank you for that question, Danielle. This is a comment from Angela. She said, "Thank you, Shannon. I really needed to hear everything you said. I lost my husband last year, and I'm also in recovery. It's been the hardest year of my life. I love the 5 minutes a day. Going to start doing that." Awesome.
Wow.
Thank you for being here. And I hope that this is helpful for you. Thank you.
Yes.
And then we also have my colleague Katrina, who's actually joining us from Australia right now. And she said, thank you so much. And that she loves the CBT tool, and she's going to start using that for herself and her clients. Catch it, challenge it, change it. Love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's awesome. Next question. She says, I struggle with the balance between affirming and acknowledging my emotions, which could be disappointment, frustration, anger, or sadness, and not just saying I must be grateful and dismiss my emotions that inevitably return. Sometimes I want to ignore my feelings and just be grateful. Suck it up, Buttercup. How can we balance the two?
Oh gosh, that is a great question, because I think you're not alone. A lot of people, including myself, struggle with that, because a lot of times we just want to push it away and stay in the gratitude, like you said, and not acknowledge what we're feeling. Sometimes I think the mistake is that there are times that we're going to want to move away from that. So let's say that I wake up and I am having one of those days that I'm really tearful and I'm angry and I'm sad, and maybe I have to go to work. I might want to table that and put it in a little suitcase to address after, and then get myself moving into gratitude. The mistake is when we don't come back for it. And so I think, this idea, that's one thing to think about. But another idea is giving yourself permission, like I said, to feel that, permission to be like that. And maybe a balance for you that I've often talked with clients about is giving yourself a time limit too. Like maybe saying, you know what, I have a couple hours this morning. I need to sit in this for a while. And then maybe a piece of moving out of that is starting to get into the gratitude. And maybe it doesn't happen that quick. We're not on a time clock, but I'm just saying, like, if you need that time and then maybe moving out of it, and maybe you need to revisit the feelings again, just to see if they're still there, because the last thing that we want to do is ignore that and stuff it. When we shove it down, it will erupt. It doesn't just sit down there. It's going to erupt sideways. And so making sure you're addressing it, and then moving yourself out of it through gratitude when you're ready. And that's really something that we each have to know ourselves well enough about what we need. And so I would just play around with that. Like, what is it that you think that you really need? Do you need to sit in that for a while and give yourself permission, and actually write yourself a permission note that it's okay to have a bad day and be crying and be sad today? And then when you feel you're ready to move out of it is a time to kind of really reflect maybe on some of the gratitude and do some of the practices.
Awesome. Thank you. And if I could echo on that just really quick, I think one of the fundamental principles of conscious recovery that really shifted my life in a huge way was acknowledging that there aren't good or bad feelings, that there's not a positive or a negative, that what I feel is what I feel. And when I heard that from TJ Woodward, it shifted everything for me, because now when I'm sad, I can say, okay, cool. I'm sad right now. That's good. All right, I'm with it. And the more I just accepted the emotional state as just that, just an emotion, the more I was able to just be with it, lean into it. And the less I fought it or resisted it, the faster it dissipated or it became easier to be with. Crazy thought, you know? Okay, let's see. Thank you, Becca. That was a great question. So our next one is from Alexa. She says, what is the best way to comfort staff members who are struggling with COVID-19? It's challenging because we are expected to keep so much distance, but I also want them to feel comforted through this experience. I want to keep clients from feeling disconnected as much as possible by setting a positive example. Has anyone run into this problem? I have.
Yeah.
I don't know about the other panelists. Anybody want to chime in on that one?
I will. I deal with, hi Alexa, my buddy. I deal with staff members constantly on a daily basis that, and clients when we're transporting mostly, right? We're doing interventions and then they're getting in the car with us. And so there's this big safety concern immediately. And we still want to do our jobs, right? We still want to get people into treatment. We still want to be there for them. So the best support I can give my staff is stay safe, you know, wear gloves, wear a mask. We ask that the clients sit in the back seat, so at least there's some distance. And then I go through this wave of fear every time I do an intervention, every time I'm in the room with somebody, with a family. If I transport somebody, I have a wave of fear after. What I'm doing now to be proactive about that is I ordered a bunch of tests so I can test my staff, test the clients before we even get them to treatment. And then on a support level, we support each other. You know, we talk about how you're feeling. Is this something you still want to continue doing? Because ultimately it's a choice during these times right now. It's a choice of, do you want to work or do you want to be home? And if you want to work, how can we stay safe? How can we support each other in staying safe? There's always a conversation. Every time somebody comes home from a drive, there's always a conversation about, I'm scared. Every time I do an intervention, I'm having a conversation with one of my colleagues about, I'm having a little fear right now. And a lot of things that you spoke about, Shannon, I think it's just on the same thing, like giving yourself permission to be scared. Like, it's okay. It can be a scary time right now, right? It's okay to have these feelings. And I work it the same way I happen to work a 12-step program. So I call the people that I'm close to and I reach out for the same kind of support that I would reach out for if I wanted to get loaded. You know, hey, excuse my language, but I call it K-fuck radio and I can't change the station. So I reach out to shut this up is what I do. And Alexa, I hope that helped a little bit. I mean, the best we can do is the best we can do.
I would chime in on that too, just to follow up with what Vicky's saying too, is I think sometimes it's just affirming for people like our employees and people that we work for and clients that, you know, to let them know this is tough work. Are you doing okay? Thank you for being here and what you're doing and you know, taking the chances being out there. And is there anything that we can do to make you feel safer? And that's all sometimes people need is a little validation and affirmation to feel like they're appreciated. And I think that goes a long way right now.
Absolutely.
I'll also just add a little piece to that. Thank you both for that. And, you know, I love the question because it talks about, Alexa talks about demonstrating or modeling, right? And one of the best ways I know how to support the people around me is what we already talked about. Can I be authentic with my experience? Can I share what's happening for me? And that creates safety. And I want to speak to something that we haven't talked about yet. I know people that are really feel ashamed to say they're happy right now, or they're at peace right now, or they're in joy. And honestly, social media, I have seen people shut down. How dare you be happy right now? We're in horrific times. And the reality that Shannon so beautifully said, this is not a flat line experience, the human experience. I can simultaneously feel joy and sadness. I can simultaneously simultaneously feel peace and fear. And to me, that is a huge part of recovery. And that's really what we're demonstrating for our employees, our colleagues, our clients, our family members. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to wake up and be just really happy. I've really, for me, it's always about questioning. Shannon, you already said this, and it's so powerful. Questioning the story that I'm attaching to it. You know, rather than going into a story, because I have literally talked to people that have said, you know, I feel a lot of joy right now, and I don't want to tell anyone because I don't feel like I'm allowed to feel joy. So, you know, they attach a story. Oh, I shouldn't feel this way. So it can go in any different direction. So what might happen if we were to demonstrate for each other whatever I'm experiencing not only is okay, it's a perfect expression of what it means to be a spiritual being, what it means to be a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Beautifully put. Thank you, TJ. Okay, do we have any other questions? Let's see what's in the chat. Ryan said, Shannon, it's great to see you and you're wonderful. Thank you so much. Teddy Roosevelt is a huge hero of mine. I love the quote and try to live by that every day. Yeah, that was an awesome quote. Yeah, I'd never heard that quote. Great quote. Alexa says, well put, TJ. Thanks, y'all. So helpful. Awesome. Okay, so we're not quite at 4 o'clock yet. So I think we'll give it another minute here to see if any last minute questions come in the chat. Let's see. TJ Woodward. Yes. Oh my God. Can I share that, TJ? Okay. TJ just sent in the chat. He said, my question is, when this is all over, can I get a big hug from Shannon?
Yes.
I want one too. Yeah, and I think I'd like to just echo something that that Vicki and Shannon Clay mentioned in the very beginning of the webinar, and that is that while all of us are professionals in the addiction field, primarily, a big driving factor in creating this webinar series was to support people who aren't necessarily dealing with addiction or substance abuse, but rather need the emotional support. And so we don't charge anything for the webinar, but I would like to ask a small fee. And that is that if you do know anybody who's having a difficult experience right now, whether it's emotionally, mentally, physically, or addiction related, that you offer this webinar as a place of support to them, because that really is our intention behind this is just to cultivate a community of support. So I just wanted to throw that in there. And it looks like we got some more questions. Perfect timing. Okay, so from Lorraine, she says, Shannon, would you please repeat the 3 things you do each day?
And that's referring to the positive psychology piece, I'm guessing.
I believe so.
So it's actually journaling and writing down. So doing this at the end of your day is sometimes the best time after you reflected on that. Is to write down 3 things that you're grateful for that are different every single day. And then journaling about 1 positive experience you had that day, 3 to 5 sentences. So pretty short, just sharing that 3 to 5 sentences of something positive that happened. And then doing 1 random act of kindness, just something on our own that we're not looking for validation for, just to be kind. 1 random act of kindness to somebody else, and writing that down what you did.
Awesome. Hope that helps, Lorraine. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and conclude. Panelists, do you have any final thoughts you wanted to share before we conclude here?
Just thank you. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, everyone who participated, and always Shannon, Clay, and Vicki, and Jeremy.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shannon. That was amazing. And I really got a lot from it. A lot about the resentment stuff. I always like the saying, having a resentment for someone. Having a resentment is like swallowing poison and hoping the other person dies.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, that was so good. Thanks to everybody. And I think I just want to reiterate that these tools that we're trying to share every week and resources that we bring apply to any person on the planet. They do not have to be in recovery. These are tangible tools for living, and we just happen to be blessed to have access to so many. So that is what we want to do, is share those, and we want you to share those with other people. And you know, if we all share with one person, we can just start making a pretty big difference all collectively. Right. So let's do that. I love you guys, all of you.
Love you.
Shannon McQuaid, get to California, god darn it.
Yeah, come work out here, Shannon.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And thank you to everybody that came today. I want to let you guys know that we're going to shoot out an email that'll have this video and any of the resources that we mentioned in today's webinar. So be on the lookout. Also next week, who do we have? TJ, next week is it Esther next week?
Oh, it is. Esther Nicholson.
Yeah,
Esther Nicholson. She's wonderful. She's the creator of Soul Recovery. She blends, in her words, 12-step recovery with kind of a new spirituality, and she is dynamic and incredible. So please join us.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be great. So with that, you guys, make sure you break out that journal. Okay.
And they can like our page on Facebook too, Jeremy, right?
Oh yeah. Great call, Shannon. Like our page on Facebook. If you like the page and follow it, you'll see all the events in there, and you can add them to your calendar and make it really easy. So,
and it's called Wellness and Recovery Resources.
Wellness and Recovery Webinars.
Webinars.
That's right.
Sorry, something like that.
Yeah. So thank you all very much, and take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and we will see you all next week.
Thank you. Bye, Shannon.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Shannon.